If you'd asked me even a month ago how I imagined Christmas would go, I'd have told you about a quiet holiday in upstate Vermont, the kind of place where the snow piles up high against your porch, and neighbors actually wave as they drive by. My house sits on a gentle hill in the small town of Maple Ridge, a place I'd come to call home after my wife passed away. The house is filled with books, photographs, and the kind of quiet that grows on you as you age. This Christmas was supposed to be simple: dinner at my daughter's place, a few carols, and the familiar comfort of family. But as I drove through the snow-dusted streets toward Erin's house, I couldn't shake the nerves I always felt around my son-in-law, Chad. He's the sort who fills a room just by talking a little too loud, always ready with an opinion he thinks is gospel. We gathered that evening in their spacious living room, my daughter Erin bustling about with trays of appetizers, their two little ones chasing each other beneath the enormous pine tree they'd dragged in from the woods. Chad's parents were there too, and a few of their friends from his law office in Burlington. Everyone was dressed for the season, red sweaters and green ties, and the scent of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. The first signs of trouble came after dinner, when conversation shifted to history, my old love. I'd taught American history at Saratoga College for nearly 40 years before retirement, and I suppose Chad, in his own way, saw that as a challenge. He perched on the arm of a sofa, his glass of wine tilting dangerously as he launched into a monologue about the Civil War. "Listen, old-timer," he laughed. "Gettysburg happened in '64. I saw it on the History Network just last week." I set my mug of tea on the polished side table, the sound echoing through the sudden hush. I knew what was coming. I'd seen it before at family events, the way Chad liked to put me on the spot. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm. "Actually, Chad, the Battle of Gettysburg was July 1st to 3rd, 1863. I taught about it for decades, you know." He scoffed, and his friends smirked, looking around for someone to laugh with them. Erin shot me an apologetic glance, her eyes, my late wife's eyes, full of silent concern. Chad's voice cut through the room again. "Come on, Grandpa. You're confusing things. Maybe you need to give those books a rest, huh?" The laughter felt sharp, not friendly, and I could feel myself shrinking in my chair. I glanced down at my hands, remembering all those lectures, all the students who'd trusted my word. Was this what it came to? A punchline in my own family's home? The conversation stumbled forward, awkward and brittle. Chad kept turning back to the story, making cracks about senior moments and old professors who forget more than they remember. Erin tried to change the subject, asking her mother-in-law about their recent trip, but the damage was done. The room had turned chilly despite the fire and the hearth. After they left for the evening, Chad in a huff, Erin trailing behind with barely a goodbye, I stood at the window, watching their car tail lights disappear down Main Street. The house felt emptier than usual. I wandered back to my library, the one room that always welcomed me no matter how the rest of the world felt. The familiar spines of my history books lined the shelves. My diplomas from Saratoga College and Brown hung above the old writing desk, silent witnesses to another embarrassing family gathering. But as I stared at those certificates, I felt an old stubbornness return, the same stubbornness that kept me teaching through budget cuts and noisy classrooms. I pulled my favorite book from the shelf, an encyclopedia so worn the leather had faded. Gettysburg, 1863. I read the entry aloud, the words steadying my heart. Outside, the snow kept falling. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered if maybe the story of this Christmas wasn't finished just yet. The days after that dinner passed slowly. There's a kind of heaviness that lingers in an empty house after a family dispute, a silence made sharper by the memory of laughter and warmth. I tried to lose myself in routine, making oatmeal the way my wife, Linda, once did, walking down to the old mill pond every morning, nodding to neighbors who barely noticed the sadness behind my polite smile. I thought about calling Erin, but something held me back. maybe pride. Maybe the old fear that reaching out would make me seem even smaller. Instead, I busied myself in the garden, even as December winds hardened the soil and snow rimmed the faded fence posts. Every so often, I caught myself replaying Chad's words in my mind: old-timer, confused, senior moment. Strange how a few careless words can cut deeper than any argument. Friday morning, I was halfway through the crossword puzzle when the phone rang. Aaron's name flashed across the screen, and for a moment, I nearly let it go to voicemail. But I answered, forcing cheer into my voice. "Hi, honey. Dad, I wanted to call about Christmas," she began. Her tone was too bright, too careful. "We're having a small dinner, just family and a few guests. Would you come? I'm making your favorite, roast duck." I hesitated, reading between the lines. Chad must not have known about the invitation, or maybe he did but wasn't thrilled. I pictured him in their big kitchen, arms folded, frowning as Aaron dialed my number. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "What time should I be there?" 6 o'clock. "And just bring yourself. That's all I want." The relief in her voice was obvious, and it settled some old ache in my chest. We made small talk. How's the weather? Did I remember to pick up my heart medicine? Were the grandkids excited for their presents? But there was a tension just beneath the surface, the kind that lingers when something important is left unsaid. When I hung up, I stared out the window at the falling snow, thinking about that Christmas dinner. I had 5 days to prepare myself, 5 days to decide how I would carry myself in that house, among people who remembered me as Professor, and people who saw me only as a relic. I decided then and there that if I was going to go, I would go as myself, head high, facts in order, dignity intact. The next few days I kept busy. I wrapped gifts for the grandkids, news science kits and a book of American folk tales. For Aaron, I chose a first edition biography of Clara Barton I'd found at a used bookstore in Montpelier. I even bought a bottle of red wine for Chad, a small gesture that I hoped would smooth the rough edges between us. Maybe, I thought, a good bottle could do what my words never seemed able to. On Christmas Eve, I pressed my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to my retirement dinner, and shined my shoes until I could see my reflection. Dressing well was a habit from a different time, but it made me feel ready, like I could step back into the world and meet whatever came with steadiness. Driving across snowy streets, my thoughts bounced between nerves and determination. Maple Ridge sparkled with holiday lights, the old church bell ringing across town. I parked behind a row of shiny SUVs in front of Aaron's house and took a deep breath, gifts in hand. Aaron greeted me at the door with a hug, her face bright despite the tension I saw hiding in her eyes. The living room was filled with laughter, the scent of roast duck in the air. Neighbors I barely knew chatted near the fireplace, and Chad held court with 2 of his work friends, already halfway through a bottle of scotch. As soon as I entered, Chad's eyes found me. "Well, if it isn't our resident historian," he boomed, voice louder than necessary. "Grandpa's here, folks. Let's hope he brought the right dates this time." A few people laughed, though not as warmly as he seemed to expect. I forced a smile, nodded, and handed him the wine. "Merry Christmas, Chad. Thought you might enjoy this." He took the bottle with a shrug, glancing at the label as if he was judging a prize pig at the fair. "Not bad," he muttered. "But you know I'm more of a bourbon man." He moved on, turning his attention back to his friends. I found Aaron in the kitchen, helping her arrange platters of food. "He's in a mood tonight," she whispered, apologetic. "It's fine," I assured her. "You've made the house beautiful. That's all that matters." We gathered at the table, passing dishes and sharing small talk. But beneath the surface, the memory of that earlier argument hovered. Chad couldn't resist another jab as we sat down, launching into the story of our Civil War disagreement, twisting the facts for his audience. "He'll argue Gettysburg till he's blue in the face, but I saw it on TV, 1864. Isn't that right, Pops? I met his gaze steadily. Some people prefer documentaries, Chad. I prefer primary sources. For a moment, the table was silent, and I could see Aaron's cheeks flush with pride. But before Chad could reply, a guest I hadn't noticed, a tall, silver-haired man, spoke up from the end of the table. I'm sorry, did you say you taught at Saratoga College? He asked. His voice was calm, authoritative. I was a visiting lecturer there in '95. Richard Evans. Economics. Surprise flickered across my face. Of course. I remember you. You gave that remarkable lecture on Reconstruction finance. Chad, suddenly uneasy, looked from Richard to me and back again. Small world, huh? He muttered. Richard smiled, then turned to the table. For what it's worth, the professor here was one of the most respected minds on campus. I still recommend his analysis of Gettysburg strategy to my students. The room grew quieter. Chad tried to muster another joke, but it landed flat. The conversation shifted. Suddenly, people were asking about my teaching days, about my travels, about the books I'd written. I realized, not for the first time, that sometimes dignity returns when you least expect it, and from the most unexpected places. As I passed the cranberry sauce and answered questions about history, I caught Erin's eye. She gave me a quiet nod, and I understood what it meant. Whatever had happened that night, I'd reclaimed something important, not just for me, but for her too. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in a hush. And for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of Christmas again. The rest of that Christmas dinner unfolded with a peculiar tension, as if everyone was waiting to see whether the old rivalry between Chad and me would spark again. But Richard's presence, unexpected and quietly authoritative, had shifted the mood. Guests drifted toward him and, by association, to me, drawn by stories of college days, tales of students who went on to become lawyers, doctors, writers. As dessert was served, Erin's homemade pecan pie, Richard and I found ourselves surrounded by a small crowd in the living room. Chad, perhaps realizing the tide had turned, busied himself at the drink station, pouring bourbon for his friends and glancing over with forced nonchalance. Do you still write, Professor? Asked one of Chad's coworkers, a sharp-eyed woman named Tina. I heard you published a piece on Civil War economics a few years back. I nodded, surprised and pleased. Here and there. Retirement gives you time, if not always energy. I just finished a review of battlefield medicine for the Historical Journal. Old habits die hard. Tina smiled. I'd love to read it. I minored in history at Brown. For the first time that evening, I relaxed fully. The conversation turned to books and research, the kind of intellectual exchange that used to fill my office hours. I told a story about my first lecture at Saratoga, how the classroom lights went out mid-presentation and I had to deliver my talk by the glow of students' cell phones. The laughter that followed felt genuine, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in months. Across the room, Chad tried to rally his audience. I don't get all this fuss about old battles and dates, he said, a little too loudly. What matters now is technology, business, the future. No offense, Dad, but no one's hiring history professors these days. There was a pause, then Richard spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Funny thing about history, Chad. The future tends to repeat the mistakes of the past, especially when people forget the lessons. Your father-in-law's lectures were legendary for a reason. Understanding context, motives, how people act under pressure, those are skills for any field. Chad flushed, but this time, he didn't reply. Erin glanced at me with a grateful smile. And for a second, I saw the little girl she'd once been, listening to bedtime stories about explorers and inventors. After dinner, as people lingered over coffee, Tina asked about my favorite historical site. Gettysburg, I said without hesitation. Not just for the battle, but for the silence that follows. Stand on Cemetery Ridge at dawn, and you can almost feel the weight of history in the air. I took Erin there once, when she was 12. She asked more questions than half my students ever did. Erin laughed, setting her coffee cup down. Dad nearly got us locked in the cemetery after sunset. He talked the security guard into giving us a private tour. The guests were drawn in, genuinely engaged now. Even the children, half asleep under a pile of blankets, perked up at the mention of ghost stories and midnight adventures. I noticed Chad in the kitchen, jaw clenched, filling the dishwasher with unnecessary force. I wondered, not for the first time, what it felt like for him to see his role as head of the family waver, to realize that respect isn't always claimed by volume or title. Later, Richard shook my hand before leaving. Don't let the world tell you your work is done, Tom. Some of us still believe the best teachers never really retire. His words lingered as the night wound down. After the last guests left, Erin pulled me aside while Chad put the kids to bed. Her voice was low. Dad, thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. I'm sorry about earlier this week. Chad, well, he can be stubborn. He's had a tough time at work, and I think he takes it out on people. But tonight meant a lot to me. I patted her hand. You've built a good home, Erin. You don't owe me an apology. Family is complicated, that's all. But I hope you know how proud I am of you. She smiled through watery eyes, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away. I remembered holding her as a baby, promising Linda I'd do right by our daughter. Some promises, I realized, never stop mattering. Before leaving, I stopped at the door, listening to the soft sounds of Christmas, carols on the radio, the kids' laughter upstairs, the hush of new snow outside. I caught a glimpse of Chad standing alone in the kitchen, staring into his empty glass. We locked eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not an adversary, but a man struggling to find his place. I gave him a small nod, a truce, or maybe just an acknowledgement that we were both trying, in our own imperfect ways. Outside, Vermont's December wind cut through my coat, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something warm inside. Not vindication, exactly. Something quieter, peace, maybe. The kind that comes when you stand your ground, but also remember to forgive. As I drove home, the headlights carving a path through the dark, I found myself humming an old carol. It wasn't the Christmas I expected, but perhaps, in some strange way, it was the Christmas I needed. By the time I got back home, the clock was pushing midnight. My little house on Ridgeview Lane looked peaceful, a single lamp burning in the front window, its golden light falling across the snow. I set my gifts and coat on the hall bench and paused in the kitchen, listening to the stillness. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the usual loneliness that creeps up after family gatherings. Instead, there was a gentle hum of satisfaction in my chest, a sense that, in some small way, I'd reclaimed my own story. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my old oak desk, the one Linda and I had bought at a flea market the summer Erin turned 8. There, beside the lamp, sat my teaching journal, its pages filled with lesson plans, anecdotes, and notes from decades past. I flipped to a fresh page and began to write, not for publication, not for anyone's approval, but for myself. Sometimes the best way to settle your heart is to tell your story the way you remember it. December 25th. Christmas at Erin's. Old wounds, new warmth. Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you who you are. Sometimes it takes standing up to a fool to remember you're not one. The next morning, the world outside my window was a postcard, blue sky, snow piled on every pine branch. I made coffee, fed the birds, and thought about the night before. Would things really be different now? Or would Chad's old resentments creep back and once the holiday glow faded? As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Erin. Thank you again for last night. The kids loved their presents. Chad is quiet today. I think you gave him something to think about. Love you, Dad. I smiled. Maybe change came in small doses over time. I sent her back a simple reply, "Love you too, sweetheart. I'm always here." The week between Christmas and New Year's passed quietly. I spent it the way I liked, reading, walking the snowy trails near the edge of town, chatting with neighbors over the fence. But in the back of my mind, I kept circling the same thought: the strange power of respect, how quickly it can be lost, and how hard it is to win back. One evening, as I was shelving books in my library, the phone rang again. This time it was Richard Evans, the economist from the dinner. "Tom, hope I'm not interrupting," he said, voice rich with New England formality. "I was wondering if you'd like to come to our monthly book group. A couple of folks were so taken with your stories the other night, they thought you might bring a fresh perspective to our next discussion. We're tackling biographies this month." I laughed. "Well, I'd be honored, Richard. Only if you don't mind me rambling on about the Reconstruction or the Gold Rush." "That's exactly what we're hoping for," I agreed, feeling a little spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, marveling at how one evening, one conversation, could open new doors even at my age. The book group met at the Red Elm Cafe in downtown Maple Ridge, a cozy spot with exposed brick and a wall of mismatched books. I arrived early, book in hand, unsure what to expect. But as soon as I walked in, I was greeted with warm smiles, introductions, and a cup of coffee. On the house, Richard introduced me to Susan, a retired school principal, and Calvin, a younger fellow who worked at the History Museum in Burlington. Our conversation ranged from Harriet Tubman to the rise and fall of railroads. For 2 hours I felt less like a retired man, more like a colleague again. Afterward, Susan patted my hand. "Don't let Chad get you down, Tom. I had a brother just like him, loud, certain, but quick to wilt when he met a real mind." I smiled at that, grateful for the camaraderie. On my way home, I realized that sometimes the world outside your family can be more forgiving, and sometimes you need to be reminded of your own worth by people who have no stake in your history. That weekend, Erin invited me over to help the kids build a snow fort in the backyard. I showed up with old mittens and a thermos of hot chocolate. Chad was there, shoveling the driveway in silence. For a moment, I wondered if we'd lapse back into old patterns, but he simply nodded at me, a little stiff but not unfriendly. I knelt in the snow with my grandkids, teaching them how to pack the base tight and carve out windows just wide enough to peer through. Erin snapped pictures on her phone, her laughter rising above the kids' shouts. Even Chad, after a while, came over to help with the roof, showing the kids how to use a garden spade to shape the perfect curve. Later, as we thawed out in the kitchen with steaming mugs, Chad surprised me. "You know, Tom, Richard Evans called me after Christmas. He told me your old lectures are still talked about at Saratoga." He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "I guess I didn't realize. I guess I should have listened more, instead of trying to prove something." I met his gaze, seeing something softer there. "Everyone wants to be respected, Chad. It's not about knowing more or being louder, it's about listening too. I'm glad you came out to help today. The kids look up to you." He nodded, and though the air was still a little awkward, something fundamental had shifted. We weren't friends yet, not exactly, but we were something closer to equals. On my way home that night, snowflakes drifting lazily across my windshield, I realized that the real gift of this Christmas wasn't vindication, or even peace with Chad. It was the quiet assurance that I still had something to give, and that new connections could grow, even in the winter of your life. As the new year approached, Maple Ridge seemed to slow down under the weight of snow and short days. I spent my evenings by the fire, reading, jotting thoughts in my journal, and occasionally fielding cheerful, if chaotic, video calls from Erin and the grandkids. The air in the town felt clearer somehow, less burdened by the old, silent resentments that used to echo through the quiet. One afternoon, After returning from the library with a stack of novels, I found a message on my answering machine, Chad's voice, tentative. Hey Tom. I was wondering if you'd like to come with me to the Maple Ridge Rotary lunch on Thursday? They're doing a history trivia segment, and I thought you'd be the best guy to have on my team. He cleared his throat. No pressure, just let me know. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't exactly an apology, but in Chad's language, it might be as close as I'd ever get. Thursday, I dusted off my blue blazer. Linda always said it made me look distinguished, and walked down to the Maple Ridge Community Hall. The place buzzed with laughter, folding chairs scraping across the wooden floor, a faint scent of baked beans and ham sandwiches in the air. Chad stood near the back, looking out of place in his business suit, but he smiled when he spotted me. Glad you made it, he said, a little too loud, but I sensed it was nerves, not bravado this time. The trivia was light-hearted, a mix of questions about Vermont history, American presidents, and oddball facts about the town's founding. To my surprise, Chad deferred to me more than once, turning to me with genuine curiosity. Tom, you know this one, right? Wasn't President Coolidge from somewhere near here? We didn't win. The bank manager's team swept the contest with a lucky guess about the world's largest maple syrup pancake. But afterward, as we munched on cookies, Chad clapped me on the back. I had fun, he admitted. I get why people like hearing you talk about history. That small moment, a simple acknowledgement, carried more weight than any big speech could have. As we left the hall, snow was falling, powdering the sidewalks and softening the world. Chad walked with me toward my house. You know, he said, his hands buried in his coat pockets, I used to think I had to prove myself all the time, especially around family. But after that dinner, after Richard and everyone, I realized maybe I've been listening with my ears closed. He glanced at me, awkward but earnest. I'd like to do better, Tom. I want the kids to remember their granddad for who he really is, not just for the stories I tell. I nodded, feeling something old and tight loosen inside me. That's all any of us can ask for, Chad. You're doing better already. We paused outside my gate, the snow swirling in the lamplight. Chad extended a gloved hand, and I shook it, both of us smiling at the small, brave step forward. Inside, I hummed my coat and stood for a moment, letting the warmth of the room sink in. Sometimes reconciliation isn't fireworks or grand confessions, it's a string of small, honest moments, stitched together over time. That weekend, Erin invited me to Sunday dinner, just the 5 of us this time. The house was quieter, the laughter less forced. The grandkids wanted to hear stories of when Dad was little, and Chad listened, grinning as I recounted tales of Erin's first camping trip and the time she tried to build a raft out of milk crates. After dinner, while Erin put the kids to bed, Chad lingered at the kitchen table. He looked at me, serious for once. Tom, thanks for giving me another shot. I know I've been stubborn. Guess I get defensive about my own father, and maybe I just projected it all onto you. I shook my head. That's how families work sometimes. We bring all our old baggage, our old wounds. What matters is what we do next. He grinned, sheepish. You ever think about teaching again? There's an adult learning program at the library, local history, that sort of thing. I could put in a word if you're interested. The idea caught me off guard. Part of me bristled at stepping back into the classroom, even a small one. But another part, one that had come alive at the book club, at the Rotary lunch, at Erin's table, felt a flicker of excitement. I'll think about it, I told him, and meant it. When I got home that night, I sat by the window, watching the lights from Erin's house glow across the snow. I thought about the path that had brought me here, the disappointments, the moments of pride, the quiet reconciliation. Family, I realized, is never perfect. But when people reach for each other, honestly and without pretense, new things can grow. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, January 7th. Sometimes peace comes quietly. Sometimes forgiveness looks like a handshake in the snow. And sometimes the greatest history lessons happen right at your own kitchen table. Winter lingered longer than usual that year. Maple Ridge seemed frozen in time, icicles glittering from every roof and the sidewalks lined with snowbanks that wouldn't melt until March. But inside my house, something felt lighter. The old tension that once hung in the air had faded, replaced by a gentle anticipation. A week after that Sunday dinner, Erin called again. Dad, the library liked Chad's idea. They want you to come talk about local history next month. Nothing formal, just a series of fireside chats. Maybe start with some Civil War stories, then branch out. Would you consider it? I know you'd make it interesting. The idea both excited and scared me. I hadn't lectured in front of a group since retirement, and there was a part of me that worried I wouldn't remember how to capture a room's attention, especially now that I was just Tom, not Professor Martin, anymore. Still, I agreed. Erin's belief in me was a quiet nudge I needed. Over the next few weeks, I prepared. I dug out old lecture notes, pored over maps and photos, even visited the local museum for inspiration. Every time I worried I'd forgotten how to teach, I remembered Richard Evans' words, or Susan's encouragement at the book club. I realized I'd never stopped being a teacher, just shifted my audience. On the night of my first talk, I arrived at the Maple Ridge Public Library a full half-hour early. The reading room was already filling up, neighbors and strangers bundled in winter coats, clutching coffee or tea. Erin and the kids sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. To my surprise, Chad sat beside them, his phone put away, watching me with a look that was equal parts nervousness and hope. I began with a story about a Vermont regiment at Gettysburg, weaving in local legends and little-known facts. As I spoke, I saw heads nod, eyes widen, hands raise for questions. People laughed at my anecdotes, listened in silence as I described the cost of battle, and lingered afterward to share their own family histories. Chad was among the last to leave. He shook my hand and said, You know, Tom, I think you were right. Sometimes the past is the only way we learn how to be better in the present. I chuckled. Don't let it go to your head. There's always another lesson to learn. After that night, the library invited me back for more talks. Word spread. Soon, people from neighboring towns started showing up, some bringing old letters or photos, hoping I could shed light on the stories behind them. It felt good to be useful again, to have people listen not because they had to, but because they wanted to. At home, I found new energy. I started volunteering with the Maple Ridge Historical Society, helping catalog their archives and sharing stories with local schoolchildren. Sometimes I'd bring the grandkids along. They'd sit cross-legged on the museum floor, wide-eyed, while I described log cabins and railroad adventures, or the strange, sad heroism of ordinary people caught up in history. Chad, for his part, seemed changed. He asked more questions, about my life, about teaching, even about Linda. One Saturday, we took the kids ice fishing on Lake Clara. As we waited for a bite, Chad confessed, I think I spent too long worrying about being respected. Guess I forgot how to give it. I shook my head. Respect isn't a trophy, Chad. It's something we pass back and forth. You've done your part. He nodded, looking out across the frozen lake. I'm trying, Tom. I really am. I believed him. As winter slowly released its grip, Erin called with more good news. Dad, the library's planning a big spring celebration. Local authors, teachers, storytellers. They want you to give the keynote. Can you believe it? I laughed, nervous but proud. Only if you promise to save me a seat in the front row. The night of the event, the library overflowed with people, some I knew well, others who'd only heard of the old professor, who made history come alive. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw Erin and the grandkids, Chad with his arm around his son, Richard Evans from the book club, Susan and Calvin, neighbors and friends. For a moment, I thought about all the Christmases past, about that long, cold night when I felt like a burden, mocked and ignored. Now, here I was, at the heart of a community, my voice filling the room not with anger or regret, but with stories meant to inspire and connect. Afterward, Chad pulled me aside. You know, Tom, it's taken me a while to get here, but I finally understand. You never needed anyone's permission to be respected. You already earned it. I'm just glad I finally saw it. I patted his shoulder. I'm glad too, Chad. Life's too short for grudges. We walked out into the cool spring night, our breath misting in the air, the world feeling full of possibility again. And as we stood beneath the stars, I thought, sometimes, the greatest victory isn't proving you're right. Sometimes, it's rediscovering the people you love, and letting them rediscover you. Spring arrived late that year, but when it finally came, Maple Ridge blossomed in earnest. Crocuses popped through the last dirty snowbanks, and the sidewalks filled with neighbors walking dogs, sharing news, or simply soaking in the sunlight after months of cold. My old house, so long a place of solitude, seemed to glow in the warmer light. Even the walls felt less confining, as if all the old ghosts had decided to take a holiday. One Saturday, Aaron and the kids showed up on my doorstep, arms full of garden tools and packets of seeds. We're planting a victory garden, Grandpa, declared my granddaughter, face smudged with dirt and enthusiasm. Chad was there too, carrying bags of mulch and a shy smile. Figured I'd better learn how to keep a tomato plant alive before I teach the kids. He joked. Besides, I could use the help. We spent the day digging, laughing, and telling stories. I showed the kids how to plant rows, how to tell weeds from sprouts, and why worms are a gardener's best friend. Chad listened, asked questions, and even made Aaron laugh when he tried, unsuccessfully, to build a trellis from an old broom handle. That afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking lemonade, I looked out over our little patch of earth. It wasn't perfect, some rows were crooked, and the squirrels would surely get into the strawberries, but it was ours. A living thing, tended by family, grown from patience and care. Later, after Aaron took the kids home for dinner and the garden was quiet, Chad lingered. We sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the first stars appear. Tom, he said quietly, I never thought I'd be the kind of man who needed to ask for forgiveness. I was proud, and I hurt you more than once. I'm sorry. The apology, simple and direct, surprised me. I didn't try to make a speech of it. Instead, I put a hand on his shoulder. We're all just trying to do our best, Chad. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. What matters is that we keep trying. He nodded, and for a long while, we sat in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of a cricket or the distant laughter of children. As weeks passed, our lives settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The library talks became a regular event, and sometimes Aaron or Chad would come just to listen, sometimes bringing friends. The kids, emboldened by their own curiosity, started their own history club, showing off what they'd learned from Grandpa at school. One evening, as we walked home from the library, Aaron took my arm. You know, Dad, for a while I worried our family might never feel whole again. But I think maybe we're better now than we were before. We know each other, really know each other, flaws and all. Her words stuck with me, echoing as I fell asleep that night, and again when I woke to birdsong and sunshine. It struck me that the heart of family isn't perfection, or even peace. It's honesty. It's having the courage to show up, say you're sorry, try again. That summer, on the anniversary of Linda's passing, we gathered in the garden. Aaron planted marigolds, her mother's favorite, and the grandkids placed painted stones along the flower beds. Chad gave a short, quiet toast, thanking Linda for the home she'd built and the stories she'd left behind. As dusk fell and fireflies drifted through the garden, I looked at my family, at Aaron, strong and wise, At my grandkids, bold and bright. At Chad, who'd found humility and respect the hard way. I realized I was not only content, but grateful for the difficult path that had led us all here. In the end, the past was not a weight but a foundation, a place from which to grow, to forgive, and to begin again. And as the stars came out, I thought, this is what legacy really means, not just being right, not just being remembered, but making room for new stories, new laughter, and the healing only love can bring.